Fear, like any emotion or anything in life, when given our attention, whether we're aware of it or not, will grow arms and legs and will turn into a tidal wave of emotion like an octopus that is starting to spread and infiltrate every area of your life. Now, some of us are really aware of what our fears are, and some of us are not. And so if we have ever experienced anxiety, then basically fear was always sitting in the background because they're very close friends. And by the time we've reached that point, that the niggling fears, little ones or big ones, they've been sitting there without us realizing. And they can limit us in ways that we're not even realizing. So some of us are like crucially aware of what it is that we're scared of. Some of us are not aware of at all of what we're trying to avoid or control excessively in our life. Behind that is a fear. And it's a fear of a perceived pain of whatever that thing is that we're clinging on too tight and trying to control it, or whatever it is we're trying to avoid. A perfect example is basically, having a conversation with, say, your partner or a friend or a family member about something that we don't want to talk about. Any kind of confrontation, the fear is real. This is what I mean about it growing arms and legs. We'll be thinking about it all the time. We'll be talking to others about it all the time. We'll be finding everything possible in our mind to grapple with how we can control the situation or avoid the situation so that we don't have to experience discomfort. And so when we dig a little deeper and we realize the role of fear, and we can attach pleasure to the outcome that we're seeking if we choose to go through rather than over it, around it, under it, which is what we usually try and do to avoid that discomfort, that vulnerability, something being out of our control. So a few steps to be able to deal with a niggling fear about something that you're trying to avoid, something that you're doing everything in your power to control, is that the first thing is we have to know what the real core fear is. And it's often not what we think. So what is the real problem? Let's say we have to have a conversation with someone that we don't want to have. The conversation is not the problem. It's your perceived pain that you're going to have to experience, which may or may not happen, and what you make that pain mean about yourself. So let's say I have to have a conversation with someone and I don't want to, or I have to do something that's out of my comfort zone, and I feel like I'm out of control because I don't know what's going to happen, and I find myself thinking about it all the time, obsessing about it, trying to find ways to get around it, go under it, rather than face it. What are you making it mean? That pain, the perceived pain that you could experience, you could be rejected, you could be yelled at, you could be rejected. It's always going to come down to some kind of I'm not going to be good enough, some kind of perceived failure. But it's what you make that mean about yourself that's the real pain that you're trying to avoid. And so once we actually know what we're making it mean, because that might not necessarily be true, you can actually get to the core of what it is that you're seeking to be able to support yourself. For example, the pleasure, if we are actually going to confront this fear. Now, why do we even want to confront it in the first place? Well, usually when we're triggered and a fear is rising, it's an opportunity for growth. And if we keep trying to avoid it or control it, we miss all the opportunities for growth. Now, if we avoid, we usually end up quite anxious. And so long-term anxiety is a habit or an inability of being able to see the pleasure on the other side of the pain and support yourself through the process versus just seeing the pain and doing anything in your power to control or avoid having that experience. When we lose the need, so this is the second thing, to control or avoid it, we stop giving it power. Because the more you try and go over, under, around instead of through, you're actually giving it your full attention. And like anything in life, if we give it our full attention and put intention into it, it will grow. It will grow arms and legs. So by controlling and avoiding, you might get a short-term little win, like, oh, I got out of that conversation. Oh, I got away with not having to deal with that. But the long-term loss is a lack of growth. So seeing the perceived pain and what you're making it mean as an opportunity for you to get the relief you're seeking and to grow and to be able to nurture and hold yourself through that experience changes it from being painful and uncomfortable and vulnerable and out of my control to what am I going to get out of this on the other side? The relief that I'm going to have, the confidence that I'm going to feel, because you could be blowing the whole thing out in your mind. And this is the thing about fear, blowing it out of proportion, and what you're imagining is creating so much stress internally. And we've all done this before. When we finally face it, it was never as bad as we were imagining it to be. So the third thing is that if we are going to face it, we've recognized through awareness what we're making the fear mean. We're losing the need to control it or avoid it, and we're making an agreement that we're going to confront a fearful situation, however big, however small. When we make space for the fearful feelings, and it could be just sensations, a desire to run, the feelings in the body, the emotion that's coming to the surface, when we make space for it to be there, it dissipates very quickly. When we try and fight it and we hit the struggle switch with it because we're trying to avoid it or control the emotion, it gives it more power. When we make space for it to be there, and then the next thing is actually hold yourself as kindly as you can through this process, with compassion and with understanding, and this ability to just stop and self-calm, we diffuse the power of it. It no longer has control over us. Because in reality, and this is the next step, in reality, what is the worst case scenario if this fear was realized? And this is where using the mind, not to tell our stories that get us feeling completely out of control, that are fearful based, but using the mind to apply logic. That's what your mind is there for. Apply logic. What can I do about it? If I was the absolute greatest version of myself, and the worst case scenario of this fearful situation or conversation or whatever it is happens, situation, event, if the worst happens, what would my greatest self possibly do? Because once you know that, your mind is going to calm down. The sensations are going to calm down because you've already imagined the future possibility of what you can do about it, which is going to give you the relief and the pleasure that you're actually seeking. When you face it and embrace it, it dissolves. When you try and manipulate the situation and give it your attention, it's going to grow. And so it can actually be this really beautiful process. And I had this with a client the other day that would not face a difficult situation with his partner, something that he didn't want to bring up from a very long time ago. And he was literally going in circles. It was affecting his business. This is one conversation. Because he didn't want to make her feel bad. And he didn't want to bring up the past, and he didn't, but he wasn't sleeping. He was taking long walks to fight off the anxiety because he couldn't stop thinking about it. And his biggest fear, which he didn't realize, was rejection. I'm worried that she's going to reject and the whole thing could blow up. But when you walk through that situation and go, okay, if she rejects, this is how you hold yourself. This is how you respond. But the end game is connection. That's what you really want, right? You want connection again. And he had the conversation. It took less than 5 minutes, and he literally was like, I can't believe it. I can't believe I've been blowing that out in my mind for so long. And it was one conversation. She took it really well because I came at it with compassion, understanding, holding himself very gently and kindly. And so she responded in the same way. So the next time you're overwhelmed about anything, go back. What is the fear? And what am I making it mean? What's the worst case scenario? What could I apply logic with if I was going to be the greatest version of myself? How would I confront this? What's the pleasure on the other side of confronting it? The pain, we can't ignore it. But if we go through it, hold ourselves, what's the pleasure on the other side? What are you going to get out of this? How are you going to grow? How are you going to feel? How's the relationship going to be resolved? What other areas of your life is it going to affect? Because if we let all the little fears go, we end up growing smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. We end up people pleasing. We end up doing things that we don't want to do. And little by little, we let go of ourselves. So this is not actually about confronting fear. It's about getting back in touch with who you are as a person that's growing, that's evolving, and not letting little aspects of yourself go because of fear, because those little things add up over time and they turn into big things. This is how people live 10, 20 years of their life and look back and have been accommodating others and living lives that they didn't want to live based on fear. So the little ones matter if you get good at catching them. What am I making it mean? Cool. How am I going to hold myself through this? What's on the other side? Because it's like being between two islands and all you're going to do is close the gap. If you don't close the gap, you're going to keep treading water. And the whole process can be beautiful. Vulnerability can actually be beautiful, and we know that it is a birthplace for growth, for relief. So, one of the best things to do is to actually out your fears. Because as soon as you get them out, it's like shining a blowtorch on them. And when you share them with everybody else, you'll realize that everybody else is running around with the same types of fears, just dressed up in different suits. But when you out them and you have support and you put a torch on it, it diffuses the power of it. So I really want you to be brave and courageous, and just even if it's a small fear, I want you to drop it below. I want you to put the fear down, however small or big. I want you to pinpoint for me what you're making it mean. If you know the pain that you've attached to dealing with it, what you're making it mean. And then if you applied logic, I want you to tell me what the worst case scenario of how you would deal with it if you were the greatest version of yourself. Tell me below, because as soon as you get this out, it gives you this opportunity to put a torch on it so that we can dissolve the power of it. And if we get into the practice of doing this over and over again, we become fearless. And this is like taming an inner beast, because every time you do it, you have to think there's a little ceiling of limitation that you've been putting on yourself, probably in many areas of your life, that will lift off. And it will lift off, and it will lift off, and it will lift off. Because you're challenging the voice in your head that's saying, don't do that, you'll be rejected. And instead you're going, maybe I will, but I'll know how to hold myself, and I'm going to grow through that. And I'm going to become a little bit more limitless in my ability to grow, rather than living out of a perceived fear of failure or rejection and just hiding and avoiding and pulling back and pulling away until we are small. So this is not just about the fear, it's about how it will affect other areas of your life. And this true sense of inner confidence, because you trusted yourself and you had your own back, that's where the growth comes from. And you start to walk around feeling energetically different on the other side, on the inside, and on the outside, people can sense it. And through others sensing it, you create great boundaries, especially in relationships. So it starts to filter into so many other areas of your life. Things will shift and change if we lose this habit, and it is just a habit, of putting our blinkers on and just pretending the fear isn't there, or not having a way, not understanding how to actually work through it. So I want to hear what it is below, and I want to hear in detail. And if you don't want to share publicly, just shoot me a message, because I'm super keen to see what niggling fears you all are dealing with underneath. Let me know how you go.